Welcome to Mishna study, Masechet Demai, Perek Mishnah Yod. Over here in this Mishnah, we're going to speak about separating Teruma from a planter. So if you're familiar with planters, right, a lot of times if you ever look at one, a lot of them have holes on the bottom. So they're able to, draw water, nourish themselves from the ground. If you put this planter on the ground and the bottom of the planter has holes in it, it's literally taking the nutrients from the ground, taking the water from the ground, right, and growing from it. Other planters, you'll find they'll put like a little, plate or bowl underneath, or sometimes the actual planter itself doesn't have any holes on the bottom. And over there, it's not directly nourishing from the ground, maybe from the air, maybe from other things, but not from the ground itself. And these two planters have two very different statuses. The first planter that we mentioned that has holes on the bottom, that's as if that's growing in Eretz Israel and you take that and put that outside in your garden, that's nourished, that's drawing nutrients, it's nourishing straight from the ground. And it's like the ground itself, right? Which is obligated to Terumot HaMasrot Mideoraita. But if you have one that has no holes on the bottom, right? That's what we call the tzitz she'eno nakuv. Right, it's not punctured on the bottom. It's totally closed off, and you put that outside in your garden. We're going to say that that's only going to be obligated midrabanan. Mideoraita, that is patur. But Chachamim come and say that you have to separate Terumot HaMasrot over there as well. Now, following what we said, these two are not going to have the same status. So are you going to be able to separate Teruma from a planter that has holes on the bottom to a planter that doesn't? No, you're not going to be able to. What's going to be the status if someone does that? That's what we're going to discuss in our Mishnah. Atzitz nakuv hareu ka'aretz. Taram min ha'aretz al atzitz nakuv, o me'atzitz nakuv al ha'aretz, terumato teruma. U'min she'eno nakuv al ha'nakuv, teruma ve'yachzor ve'yitrom. Min ha'nakuv al she'eno nakuv, teruma ve'lo te'achel ad she'yotzi alea terumot u'ma'asrot. So if you have a planter that is punctured on the bottom, that's like the land itself. That's like it's growing outside in your field. Now, let's say a person goes and he separates Teruma from something that grew in his field, something that literally grew out in his garden or in his field. And he separates, that itself over, to cover also the atzitz. That's nakuv, the atzitz that has a puncture on the bottom. Right? Those both have the same status. So if he goes into the field and he has in mind he's separating a little extra and he's going to cover, right, the planter that he has, the punctured planter, okay, right? That counts, or vice versa. That counts as teruma. That teruma is totally, totally fine. Now, what if it's the opposite? Now, let's say it's mishe'eno nakuv ala nakuv. Let's say he has a planter that's not punctured on the bottom. Right? It's just a regular planter, no holes on the bottom. And I want to cover the other planter that has holes on the bottom that's drawing from the ground itself. Over here, we're going to say, he's separating something that's only obligated midrabanan to cover deoraita, right? Over here, we're going to say it's teruma ve'achzor ve'yitrom. So technically, it shouldn't be anything, right? Technically, he needs to redo his teruma. Right, that's what they said. He needs to redo his teruma. But we say over here, it is considered teruma, and he needs to redo it. Why is it considered teruma? So Rambam explains that it's considered teruma over here, midrabanan, and that is because we don't want to. We want to give it a certain status, right? We don't want people to be mizalzel, right? To look at it and despise it and make fun of it. We have to give it kavod. Once you call it a name, right? Once you say what it is, once you call it teruma, at that point, it's going to keep that status of teruma. Rambam doesn't explain this over here, by the way. He explains later on in Masechet Terumot. Now, the next piece of the Mishnah, if you separate minanakuv, right, from one that is a punctured one, right? Okay, that's deoraita. And you use that to separate al she'eno nakuv to cover drabanan. Okay, that should be fine. That's teruma. But over here, this is interesting, right? Lo te'achel ad she'yotzi alea terumot u'ma'asrot. That portion that you give to the kohen is not allowed to eat it until he separates terumot u'ma'asrot to cover that piece that he received. Why so? Because you used something that was, you used the deoraita to cover a drabanan. Right? Now, that piece that you took out as deoraita, that you say you're calling this teruma to cover a drabanan, right? Okay. If you're covering, it's only in drabanan, mideoraita, that piece that you took out as teruma has an aspect of tevel associated to it, because it's not really teruma. It wasn't meant to cover a drabanan. Now you just took off something. You separated this piece. You're trying to cover something else that's not obligated mideoraita. What'd you do? You just took a regular piece, you took tevel, and you separated it aside, and you gave that to the kohen. Mideoraita, that piece has tevel. It's associated with tevel. So the kohen now receives it. You think you're giving him teruma, but mideoraita, that piece is tevel. So what could the kohen do? The kohen can't eat it. The kohen's not allowed to eat tevel, right? No one's allowed to eat tevel. So what does he have to do? He needs to fix it. How do you fix tevel? Well, like anything else, you separate teruma and maaser from that piece. So he needs to separate 2% for teruma to cover, and maaser 10%. Another 10, whatever he needs to do to separate, to fix that piece that he received.